You know what is one random thing that I always get kind of excited about? Change. And sometimes it's good to change. Welcome folks! The newer people of this channel probably aren't too familiar with this sort of POV. I haven't really filmed in this sort of POV in a long time because I've been kind of complacent and been happy with my camera being in this corner instead. But let's come back to this. I feel like this is a bit more YouTuber-like, and I think for, you know, all intents and purposes, probably a little bit nicer to look at as well. So, it's hard to believe, but it's actually been 3 years. 3 whole years since V-Series has started. I mean, not entirely 3 years. I guess May will mark exactly 3 years, but it has been basically 3 years since the V-Series has started. And, you know, since the reboot happened and we sort of got thrown into this entire kind of whirlpool of changes that the game went under, essentially. And so, before we get into Overdress, you know, we were just a couple days away at the time of uploading this, only a couple days away of the actual Overdress announcement stream, but I wanted to take the chance to kind of reflect on these last 3 years. You know, I did a video similar to this way back when G was ending, so this was like, you know, basically the middle of 2018 or so, where, you know, the video made Thank You G, where I kind of reflected on the different aspects, you know, whether it was the anime or the game or the community or my personal things, kind of reflected on all those different things. And today I kind of want to do the similar thing. It, you know, spoiler alert, it's not going to be as sentimental as the G one, because personally, as much as, you know, there's good and bad parts, I personally didn't feel too sentimentally attached to this era of the game, and if anything, I'm more excited for the future of it. So just like I did with my 1 year of zero reflection video, we're going to be kind of looking at this in both the good parts and the bad parts, and we're going to start with the good stuff. I'm also in between going to talk about the sort of the mixed things, so things that are both good and bad depending on who you talk to. So some people might think this is the best part, some people might think it's a terrible part, so we're going to kind of split up into those. This video might drag on for a little bit because there's a lot I wanted to say. Also, a huge shout out to my Twitch community for helping me with certain points. We had a discussion on one of my streams where we kind of reflected together on this entire 3-year process basically, and so let's just get into it. So let's start with the positives. You know, it's been 3 years of the V-Series. Let's talk about some of the good things that have come out of the game rebooting and, you know, into becoming what it is right now. So the first thing, of course, this is probably the most obvious one, the one that most people would mention as well, is the game is very easy to get into now. So the game got more simple, the game became very approachable, trial decks became much better, and overall there aren't as many things to pick up, not as many things that you need to grab, not as many things you need to get and stuff like that. And therefore the game is pretty easy to approach, and overall I think learning a single deck doesn't really take that much time either anymore. So it's overall an easier, more streamlined process of getting people into the game. You know, you can literally hand them a trial deck and they will have a pretty decent deck to start out with. So the trial decks have become really, really good, and overall it's just become a very approachable game compared to G. I think a lot of people have the argument that, you know, if you get someone into the game during G, it's like they have to first pick up their main deck, they got to pick up their G zone, they got to pick up their G guards, their old strides, new strides, all that kind of stuff, and then also the main deck and all that stuff. Whereas in the V-Series, you know, with standard, of course it was just like, here's your 50 card deck, you have these tokens, you know, the markers that literally come as box toppers and cost 10 cents. So that kind of was the argument that, you know, the game has definitely become much more approachable, and that it's true. You know, I think a lot of people didn't struggle to teach people the game and get them into the game as much anymore, and that was definitely a plus. The game also definitely got more simple, per se, so, you know, a lot of effects are pretty straightforward, and, you know, they're quite similar to each other. That we're going to touch up on that a bit later, but overall, the game has become more simple, so for the people that maybe were kind of scared of getting into Vanguard in the G era, definitely felt that the game was more approachable in the current form that it's in. Now, some other game-specific things, I think a really good thing was trigger sentinels. So, draw PGs, critical sentinels. I think putting PGs on a draw trigger was actually fantastic, and that was actually a really smart move from Bushiroad's like perspective in general, because having, you know, our grade 1 slots always having to have 4 of those grade 1 slots being dedicated to PGs, just, it wasn't really, you know, it was a deck building hindrance, I would say. And now being able to use like 4 of our 16 slots for PGs in the main deck in just the triggers is way better in my opinion. I think that was a really good change overall. On top of that, the higher shield values I think is also really appreciated. So, you know, they raised grade 1s being from 5k shield to 10k shield, and then also we had, you know, triggers, crits, and fronts basically became 15k shield, and heals became 20. So adding that extra shield value was definitely a really good move, and if anything, I wouldn't mind it being raised even more in Overdress too. On top of that, there's something pretty interesting, but it feels as if they fixed some bad clans. And what I mean by this is that there are certain clans that definitely, throughout all of Vanguard's history until the reboot, were never really that good. So I'm thinking about stuff like Murakumo, I'm thinking about stuff like Tachikaze, where they certainly had maybe 1 or 2 times in the history of the game where they kind of came up and were kind of decent, maybe like a good rogue deck or something like that. You know, even for Murakumo, I can think of like couple points in time where that actually happened, but the V-Series really took those underperforming clans and made them some of the best. You know, like Tachikaze was arguably, with Anger Blader, one of the best decks. Murakumo, every single support that Murakumo ever had in Standard was actually amazing, you know. Even when the boss unit wasn't so good, so like the second Dueling Dragon, it was still like, that had Shirayuki in it, so that was an amazing card on its own. So they really managed to make some of the worst clans really, really good all of a sudden, and I think that that was actually quite nice to see that they are capable of, you know, kind of changing up clans to become good, even though people really thought like, oh, clans like Murakumo will never be good. I also think the addition of new trigger types was actually fine. Front triggers never really got out of hand. You know, the decks that abused them, they felt more like high rolly decks that kind of crumbled because they relied on triggers too much, and overall fronts felt pretty okay, I would say. So I'm actually quite cool with them introducing new trigger types, and I think that adding front triggers was cool, but hopefully next time they add a new trigger type, they don't actually add it to just, you know, a subset of clans like they did with Axel. I would much rather prefer that if they add a new trigger type, that they actually make it for all clans so that, you know, everyone could enjoy them. The only bad part when I'm recording like this is that I have a lot of hand movements and body language, and I'm always afraid of hitting my mic, so I'm mostly using this arm. That's actually slightly annoying. Now, when the V-Series started, when the reboot happened, we had some rule changes, and now some of these rule changes were actually really, really good. I think one of my favorite ones was the new once per turn ruling, so that way you basically had a choice that if you had a card that had a once per turn effect, but you could, let's say, like stand that card multiple times, like for example Tidal Assault or something, right? Tidal Assault's restand is a once per turn, but if you, for example, wanted to not use it on the first time it attacks, but later on, you could actually say like, okay, I'm not going to use it now, I'm going to use the once per turn effect later, and that was it. Whereas back in G era and previously, you had to actively play around your own effect to not trigger that once per turn the moment it would activate. So that was actually a pretty nice change. Also, I think the new mulligan rule is fantastic. So the fact that, you know, we put back cards, then draw, then shuffle is way better than put back cards, shuffle, then draw, because you will never actually draw into the same cards, like the same physical cards, because they will go to your bottom of the deck first, then you draw, and then you shuffle it. So that change was probably one of the best things about V-Series in general. Another thing that I feel like I was a little bit iffy on when it was first announced, but then kind of became much more happy with, was the new typography. So I remember when they revealed that, like, you know, the way that they write the cost will change, so that instead of saying like the cost first and then the effect and then you may pay the cost if you do blah blah blah, now it's just like, you know, like when this card comes into play, cost this. So the way that the cards are written are much more streamlined, and I think that that is a better thing as well, because it just makes it easier to read. And I think the typography, the new symbols too, like Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1, all those things are also much easier to look at. You know, remember when it used to be just like CC1, CB1, like, or just like little symbol and then like 1 and stuff like that? I feel like a lot of people didn't really understand what those were, so the new symbols definitely make things a little bit more easier to explain and learn as well. Now, I'm gonna come back to this one later on, but I think that to some extent the V-Series did explore some unique mechanics and design. You know, the whole fact that like tokens became a thing for clans like Neonectar and Nubatama, you know, and then things like, you know, Gansalot turning your rearguard blaster blades into vanguards and like stuff like that. They definitely explored some interesting designs that I feel like they should have done more of, because it really showed that they were capable of things like that. And then, you know, like Gastille that just got revealed is also like really interesting design that I think a lot of us do like, and for that reason I think that, you know, they could have done more of that rather than sometimes being a little bit too homogenized. Another thing I really liked in the V-Series was orders. Actually, I think orders were cool. You know, adding finally like spell cards basically to Vanguard I think was overall a nice touch, and you know, some decks relied on them, some decks kind of didn't really care about them at all, and I think that that is something I hope they explore more in Overdress. If anything, I'm hoping that that is the main mechanic for Overdress, but we'll see, because it feels like they haven't done too much with it yet, but I really like what they've been doing with it so far at least. Another nice thing was that as soon as they announced the reboot, the first thing they basically said was like they promised that every clan, all 24 clans, would get yearly support, and now while that yearly support wasn't always great, usually it was, you know, something you could at least look forward to, and that promise, at least having that promise that we are getting yearly support for clans, definitely made it, you know, feel better at least, because we didn't really have that in the past, and it's just like everyone kind of assumed that your clan would get support at least once a year, but it wasn't like explicitly stated either. On top of that, especially later on into the V series, they really explored budget archetypes and like budget options, so cheaper decks to build for similar clans. So if you'll notice, like most of the recent sets have had a cheaper deck build that you can pick. Like, so for Novas you could have built Blouse, for Angels you could have built No-Seal, etc. You know, for DP you could have built Metalborgs. And so they started offering those like budget archetypes quite a lot from like VBT08 onwards, I want to say. Maybe even earlier, but I feel like it really started from VBT08 onwards. And at first I definitely felt iffy about them, because I was like, oh no, like my precious rarity slots that could be going to the main deck, like why is this happening? But then honestly I was like pretty happy about it, because this finally meant that people that, you know, are playing more on a budget can actually have a pretty decent deck. Like a lot of these decks, especially like, you know, Blouse and No-Seal, are really good decks, even being budget, you know. And so of course there are still some pieces in those decks that are a bit more expensive, but regardless, like you can start building those decks on a really nice small budget and they're pretty decent, and I really hope they continue that into the V series too. They kind of had that at the end of G as well, so I hope it's not just like a thing that they do exclusively at the end of like a, you know, an arc or whatever, but rather kind of explore it throughout the entirety of, you know, the game's length. Now, overall, the V series was mostly using, you know, rehashed designs, let's put it. So, you know, cards that existed in the past that got their V series remake. So, you know, cards that basically got their new form, like the same card, but reimagined in the V series, right? So, for the most part, we didn't get too many new designs, but the ones that we did get were actually really good. So, I'm not even talking about like supporting cards, like how, you know, we have like Gavriel, but then like Hamiel, for example, is a completely new card. What I'm talking about is like the completely new and original designs. So I'm talking about like Godhand Dragon, Malkuth Melek, Uranus and Valkyrion, you know, Isabel. Those are like brand new archetypes, brand new unit types that did not exist at all in the game until now. And that goes to show that when we get to Overdress, if that is the level of quality that those designs will have, just like not even in terms of skills, but in terms of like looks, like those units look amazing. So if they can keep that up into the Overdress, then I'm honestly pretty hopeful about, you know, having some really cool units to get attached to in the future as well. One thing that they also did quite well, I think, is reprints. Overall, reprints have always been kind of a strong part of Vanguard, I think. You know, especially in English, they always did like, you know, Revival Collection to give us a bunch of reprints and stuff like that. But overall, it felt like, you know, Draw PGs were pretty frequently reprinted, and, you know, then like started putting them into trial decks as well, you know, and then the sort of like Stride Fodder Grade 3 Searchers started to get reprinted as well. And overall, it feels like the reprint department was pretty alright. You know, sometimes it definitely felt a little bit lacking, but then they came out with Festival Collection and it was like, wow, okay, you are capable of doing a reprint set. So, and sometimes, you know, it's hard to handle a reprint set because you can't just make it full of reprints, because then it's hard to sell it. So sometimes, you know, that's kind of what Yu-Gi-Oh does, I think. It's like they do a reprint set, but they add still some new cards to it to make people want to buy them. So even if they have all the cards already, or like a rarity upgrade or something like that. So I think that, you know, they've been doing pretty good with reprints overall. And speaking of product, I think the MLB product, like the late trial decks, the Chronojet, Asha, Altmile, and I would say even Uranus, the late trial decks plus the MLB deck were some of the best designs they've ever done. And I even made a tweet the other day that I really hope that they continue to do this thing where they release like MLB style products at least once a year that essentially have like a competitive deck in a box. You know, we don't really need like the fancy deck box and the sleeves and everything. Just having a competitive product that you can tell people you can buy this for like 50 bucks or whatever, and like you can have a competitive deck that you can go to tournaments with and expect to do pretty well. Like that's what the MLB deck was. If they can keep like making those at least like once a year, that would be fantastic. You know, like just absolutely amazing. And I really hope that they continue to do that, because like the MLB product for all intents and purposes was amazing. It's just a shame that the goods that it came with kind of made the product a little bit expensive. That kind of went over people's budget too. Alright, now getting on to other things, I think the Shinamon anime was amazing. So V-Series anime, I'm gonna keep more of that for later on in this video, but the Shinamon anime started off a little bit questionable. I definitely was kind of like, oh, what is this fan service stuff going on? But then when it like kind of wrapped up the entire franchise all in one, it felt really good, you know. It made that connection from the Aichi series to early G, and it was really cool. Even though if it was kind of an alternate universe, kind of alternate dimension type of thing, it was still really cool to see them kind of still do something with it, you know? On the other hand, I think the If anime was fun, I guess, is like a good way to put it. I don't think it was anything spectacular. I haven't finished it yet either. Like, I think I still have like 5 or 6 episodes to go or something like that. But it was still fun, I guess, as like a filler until Overdress comes out. And I think that, you know, a lot of people just enjoyed it. I think it was trending on Twitter a couple times too, because, you know, some of the things they did in the anime definitely, you know, get people's attention, you know, in certain ways or another. All right, back to product. So another thing that I have written down here is that the thing with trial decks that became really nice ever since the Shinmon one was that you basically, I mean, the trial decks for all of V series were basically you buy one, get everything, and that was really, really cool. But on top of that, from Shinmon onwards, they started doing the thing where it's like you buy one trial deck, you get all the cards you need in the ratios you need, and they also threw in like one of the 4 PGs was a draw PG, so you could like buy the remaining draw PGs and like not even have to buy extra trial decks, or if you really wanted to, you could buy 4 of the trial deck. But I mean, that was a way to get people to buy more trial decks, I guess. But overall, it's nice that you really like to get started in the game and have like a decent deck to start out with without really like having to splurge any more money. The trial decks really were great. Like, you buy one, you get everything you need, even 4 PGs, and that was something that, like, you know, even in G they still did like trial decks where you needed to buy at least 2 to get full playsets of certain cards, and most card games still do that, you know, if not 3 or 4. And you know, Vanguard used to be in that like buy 4 to have a playset of everything, but I'm really glad that they stopped doing that and they've become much better. So please continue that into Overdress. Please give us good entry products. The best feeling is letting people, like new players, know that they can buy a trial deck and just have a complete deck that they can get started on, and then slowly upgrade it. Like, that is honestly the best thing. I think also Premium Collection, of course, is a great thing. I personally think that Premium Collection was also hype every time, and you know, being able to get hype for new strides was really cool. So of course, Premium Collection is a must. Like, I think I don't want to put it as a good thing simply because it's not so much that I'm saying like, oh, this is something that like I'm so glad they implemented this. If Premium Collection didn't exist, it would be a huge problem. Let's just put it that way. So like, Premium Collection for me is a staple for the game for as long as it's going to go on for, because if you're not going to be supporting strides in the future as like part of the game's mainline focus, you're going to have to still print them somehow, because people love premium, and premium is a lot of people's main format. And you know, so I think to me Premium Collection is a staple. That's why I'm not like saying like, oh, thank you Bouchard for making Premium Collection. I'm just saying like, good on you, but you know, make sure to keep doing it. Now, kind of a double-edged sword for me is I like that they started to print a lot more cards that fix consistency, so we got a lot more searchers. Like, overall, every deck had like a top 7 to search for the specific like named card, whether it's like a Luard card, Vanquisher card, whatever. And also, like, every clan had the check top 5 for grade 3, which is also really nice. The not so nice part is that those grade 1s were gated to triple rare, and I think that that is honestly not that great. Stride Fodders were rares, why make these triple rares? And I feel like it also detracted from the excitement of like, oh, I can't wait to see what kind of like triple rares I'm gonna get from my clan. Oh wait, we're still missing the grade 1 like grade 3 searcher. So it's like, oh, you know, it was a good concept but executed slightly badly. On top of that, especially later on, they started to amp up the pull rates. So now it's, you know, you get like 2 VRs per box and stuff like that. Like SPs, like you either get like 2 VRs or like 4 triples or like an SP or something thrown in there. So the pull rates being amped up is really, really good. Please continue to do that in the future as well. I think people don't really complain about the amped up pull rates, especially after the little disaster that VB28 had in the Japanese format that we didn't really have in English, luckily. On top of that, what I personally like is that, you know, unlike Strides, where like every card and like, or G guards, where every card was a unique card, which, you know, I love G, but the not so good thing there was that, of course, they each had their own price. With markers, because they all did the same thing, you either had the option to, you know, just get the normal ones, the promo ones, the common 10-cent ones, or you had the option to flex, and you could flex with IMRs or secret rares. You also had like origin rares and SVRs. If you wanted to add more bling to your deck, they made a lot more of that accessible. You know, they had it in G too, but here it felt like they really let you bling your deck out pretty well until, I mean, they didn't really have SPs for a while, but overall, like, the ability to bling and ability to have the option to bling was really, really nice. That, you know, for collectors and people that want to have max rarity decks, is pretty damn nice. I think a nice little thing that a lot of people don't talk about anymore is limited fight. So this was the format they kind of created where you can only play with double rares and below, so not even triples included. And so that not many people play that format, but having the option that that format exists, and, you know, at certain times of the year people played it more so than others, I think it was pretty cool. You know, having that kind of like budget, I think it's called Pauper format, was also definitely pretty nice, I think. Now, this is going to be a little bit more personal in terms of good things. I think the fact that they re-invite world champions now is really, really good. So basically now if you win the world championship, you get re-invited to the next one immediately. And I think that that is definitely very, very cool and overall just a great system. And I hope that they continue to do that in the future as well. But there's no real reason for them to discontinue it at this point, especially because we didn't have Worlds this year. So yeah, on top of that, 2020 was the first ever time, and you know, as such, it is part of the V-Series that content creators were allowed to reveal cards. So first time ever, we had the opportunity to reveal cards for Premium Collection, and hopefully that continues into the future as well. But, you know, this is something that every other card game has. You know, like I think Yu-Gi-Oh! YouTubers reveal entire archetypes too, and it'd be nice if we could have that kind of ability in the future too. You know, not just premium stuff, but actually reveal like main set stuff too, because it does feel like the game is still kind of choked up in Japan right now, and like, you know, we just get stuff later on. But it would be nice if we could get more involved with, like, you know, the Western content creators, or even just the Japanese content creators, like to let them reveal cards too, because there's amazing Japanese content creators for this game as well. And then another thing is collabs. Collabs were actually pretty well done, I think. So like stuff like Bang Dream actually really led to people getting into the game, and that was really good. In Vanguard 0, you know, like the Hololive collabs definitely helped too, and then from 0 people got into the actual TCG as well. But overall, I think like Bang Dream and the upcoming Monster Strike Bang Dream definitely added more people to the game. It definitely felt like there was people getting into the game that only got into it because of Bang Dream, and I think that that was definitely a good point too. And of course, with, you know, everything that happened in 2020, Remote Fight was a very fast response from Bushiroad's side. So they definitely, like, they saw the situation, they instantly launched that server and promoted it, and you know, it got traction in both the global side and in Japan especially, and people really praised Bushiroad for that early adaptation, whereas other games didn't have it yet. And I think as early as March we already had, or April, we already had the Remote Fight server, so that was honestly really, really nice as well, and very quick. Finally, this is the last point, is that I think the cost of decks definitely reduced a lot. I was rewatching my video that I made on like thanking G, and like for everything that it's done, and at one point I noted that even to build a casual like tier 2, tier 3 deck, you would sometimes have to shell out like 200, 300 bucks. That would never really be the case anymore in the current form of standard or even premium to an extent, because especially the more casual, the more budget decks won't even break 100, I would say, and then the actual competitive decks are like 150, maybe 200 tops. So the cost of the game feels like it's definitely gone down quite a lot, and I think, you know, whether that's thanks to the bigger pull rates or just because, you know, people kind of just open a lot more product, maybe, I'm not really sure. But you know, I don't really know how the workings of the market actually are, but you know, I think it's overall a good thing that the deck prices overall did decrease, even though there were certain points where some staples were really expensive, like the main and stuff like that. Anyway, let's look at the sort of mixed bag for me. Some things that are probably amazing for certain people and then not so amazing for others. So the first thing I have here is V starters. So not starter decks, but specifically starting Vanguards. So as you all know, the starting Vanguards in V only had one single effect for the most part, and that was when rode upon, draw a card, and if you're going second, add a quick shield ticket to your hand. And while that was a nice thing, like, I can see why it's nice, because it helps with early consistency. So you can actually like play lesser of certain grades because you draw more cards in the early game, so you have a higher chance to actually, you know, hit that certain card because you just naturally draw more cards. So of course, in some ways that is a very nice thing, but at the same time, starters were like one of the biggest central pieces behind some deck strategies. Like, think of gears, like, you know, like Chronodran and stuff like that, or like even for like a lot of other stages of the game, like Legion back then, we had like Judge Bow, which was super important for shadows and stuff like that. So we had so many starters that were integral to the strategy of the clan, and losing that felt like losing a piece of your deck, because it just became another similar style effect as everything else. And if anything, it felt like a little bit of foreshadowing for what some V-Series boss units ended up becoming too, which is just similar versions of each other. Now, this is also both a plus and a minus, is that deck building became kind of spoon-fed throughout all of V-Series. So this isn't talking about Premium. A lot of these points are very standard specific. I feel like Premium, while it has changed a lot, like the deck building is still very, very flexible. That's the great thing about Premium. But Standard in particular, for a very long time, like from the early V-Series onwards, was basically like, all right, here's your deck. Next set comes out supporting your deck. Take out some of these commons and rares and put in these double rares and triples instead, because they're direct upgrades of those certain cards, but the boss unit maybe stays or whatever. But it just felt like they did that like over and over again, and then now it's like you want to build, like, I don't know, a Gavriel deck. It's like, well, it's pretty obvious which cards are good, you know? It's like, it doesn't there's not much room to kind of experiment and go crazy with the deck builds, even though the card pool got pretty big. The card pool is 3 years old now, and you know, there is quite a lot of stuff to choose from, but it's like, why would I want to play like, I don't know, like the Celestial Damage Swapper from like way back of the first Angel Feather support set, you know? It's like, there's just cards that do that job way better now, or like just are more cohesive, and overall it felt like deck building was kind of spoon-fed, which is, from my perspective, not that great, but from the perspective of a player just getting into the game, and which we definitely had quite a lot of, it's great, because they don't have to, like, you know, kind of think too much about the deck building. They can just get into the game, you know? It's like, the deck build is pretty obvious, they can just get into the action of playing Vanguard, and that was it. And for some people, that's all they really need, so I think that's both a plus and a minus. And this one, I think there's more people that dislike it, myself included, but I definitely know there's a few people that do like it, so I kept it under mixed. But you know, right before we go into the negatives, which is the change to the stride rule. So if you didn't know before, in order to stride, you had, you know, both players had to be at grade 3, and then on top of that, if you wanted to like stride differently with something like Sea Breeze, your opponent had to have been on grade 2 for at least 2 turns. So basically on the same grade 2, so they could rewrite grade 2s to negate that. What they did in the V series as soon as we got into it was that now to stride, if you've been on grade 3 for at least 1 turn before this, you can stride already. You use something like Azel, you know, to get up to grade 3 while your opponent's on grade 1, no problem. That's all good, man. It's all fine. Next turn you can stride on your opponent while your opponent's on grade 2, you know? And we had decks that abused that very early on. As soon as Gold Paladin came out, literally half a year into V series, immediately stride rule got abused, and you know, it just keeps happening now. It's not so central as Azel was back then, you know, like Luard, yeah, I can do that, but it's like, it's okay, you know, they take a while to set up anyway. But I personally don't like that stride rule change. I personally liked it a lot more when, you know, throughout all of G, we had this sort of pressure, like who's gonna ride up first, who's gonna give each other the first stride. Of course, that's kind of even disappeared now because, you know, you can ride up your V-Series boss unit and do so much with your deck before even striding that, you know, of course, that aspect kind of died off as well, but I kind of hope they revert the stride rule, at least to have that kind of pressure back into the game too. Alright, let's talk about the negatives, and I'll do my best not to get too heated because y'all know I don't like talking about negative stuff too much, but there's definitely quite a lot of things that weren't too great about the V-Series. So of course, you know, all the positives are really big positives. Like, the positives we talked about are huge and really important for the game overall, and you know, I'm really thankful for them, and like, I personally really appreciate the V-Series for them, but here's the reasons that I don't appreciate the V-Series for. First things first, and this is something I'm very vocal about and I absolutely hate, is the format split. Now, I personally, I don't know, you know, it's a good thing that they created standard as a nice way for people to get into the game without being like G regulation, where it's like nobody plays G regulation, you know, like G cards onwards back then. And it was nice that it was good for new players to get into, but the format split literally resulted in like endless civil war within the community. Like, always people are like, standard sucks, oh my god, premium sucks, oh my god, like, yeah, like always just like barking at each other and just screaming at each other all the time. Like, this is the main reason why I can never go on Facebook anymore, outside of just to share my videos and streams, because it is just like always happening. There are some times when it isn't, but the moment somebody starts it, a bunch of people start it as well, and it's just like, this like all-out war between premium and standard players has just been such a pain in the ass, and I really hope that, God, like, there's no way to undo it either, you know, there's no like undo button on this either, and I do appreciate standard for existing, for letting people get into the game easier, but man, oh man, did the format split suck, and it was by far the worst part of everything in my opinion. Another thing that I've been kind of hinting at towards, you know, throughout all of the positives is clan identity got really watered down. So, you know, just think about how many Mordred clones are there. When Mordred came out, pretty cool card, you know, it's like, oh, get all these force markers and ooh, restand your front row, a bunch of nice swings, very cool. How about we give you 24 flavors of that, of plus 10k to front row, ooh, generate several force or axle markers, ooh, restand your front row, haven't seen that one before. It just kept happening onwards and like non-stop. Like, I feel like we never had, you know, people used to complain, remember when people used to complain that like, I hate that every deck has a guard restrict, why does everything have to have a guard restrict, or like +1 drive, +1 crit, why does everything have that? At least those were simple enough that they didn't take away from the gimmick of a deck, you know, the deck still did its own thing, but then maybe at some point it still gained a crit and a drive or or something, you know? Whereas here it was like so many decks where just like I get a bunch of markers or I get a bunch of power in my front row and then I restand my rear guards and I swing a bunch of times. It's like even Messiahs are basically that, you know? It's like get some markers, get some power, restand a bunch of times, but oh, it's with lock, so therefore it's very original and very different. No, it's not. It's literally just Mordred again. The anime until Shinamon was pretty bad. So this is something, you know, I've literally always watched the Vanguard anime. It's one of the biggest things that got me into the game in the first place, and the V-Series anime was a joke. Why? Was it like the animation quality got worse? The soundtrack was really good, but that's because of the same composers as the GNX and GZ soundtrack, I think, so that's partially why. But it felt like Akira Ito's manga just doesn't function in anime format at all, it feels like. And, you know, like it made me made me feel worse about the manga than I initially quite liked it. So I don't know, it just felt like it was not suited for an anime adaptation, and a lot of us missed the original anime much more. There were some good parts, you know, some characters got to shine much more, like Asaka or Maki and, like, you know, characters like that, but then some of them just got watered down, and then like the Koshien circuit was just a joke in general. Like they hyped up the Koshien so much just to kind of like blaze through it. Nothing really happened. So it's like, oh my god. But luckily with Shinamon they kind of rescued it, so it was sort of okay, but please no more nostalgia. Nostalgia bad. Nostalgia bad. Charizard bad. Another thing that I personally didn't like too much is set releases became way more frequent than before, in my opinion. To the, you know, it was kind of ridiculous that throughout a pandemic we had like monthly, if not like every 3 or 4 weeks releases. That felt a little bit yikes, and I'd like things to slow down a little bit in the future. Like one set every 1.5 months is fine, or like every 2 months is also fine, or like having a main set every 2 months and then in between filling it with like maybe like a little extra booster or like a trial deck release or like whatever, right? But just maybe not big main sets every month. That felt a little bit too much and a little bit too hectic, even for a game like Vanguard where, like, you know, if you play just one clan you don't care about the releases. But, you know, I'd rather have more clans packed into one set rather than having like monthly releases. You know, at least then if you have more clans in one set you could make them a little bit less frequent. But yeah, that's just that. The reboot was, you know, for all intents and purposes, a nostalgia bait. You know, it was nostalgia bait. It was, remember these good times you spent with Blaster Blade and Dragonic Overlord and Dragonic Overlord the Cross and Blaster Dark whatever. Like, it felt like the entire time it was just a nostalgia bait. You know, it was kind of giving you that feeling of like, remember this card? Well, look at it now, isn't that great? But honestly, like playing some of these decks, it honestly kind of ruined it for me. Like I remember there was like certain decks that I played that I enjoyed back in the day that got remade into the V series that I like, while playing those decks I was like, this isn't the kind of fun I had back then. If anything, I have more fun playing those decks in Zero right now, because that, you know, that's the actual effects of those cards. That's the actual way those decks played. You know, so Zero is like, it's a great nostalgia milking machine. It was made to milk nostalgia, basically. But V-Series, like, why dedicate 3 years of the game just to milk nostalgia, you know? I spent a lot of the first 2 years just waiting for the G stuff to come out, and then, you know, like, I feel bad for, like, Asha fans that loved the Bloom playstyle that was, like, so mechanical and so cool, to then just being watered down to like, everything gets power and crit same as my Vanguard. GG's, you know, like, it just felt so disappointing, and I don't know, just please stop nostalgia pandering. I don't want to see it anymore. Let's just, when we get into Overdress, let's just forget that Blaster Blade ever existed and move on to something new, please. Alright, let's move on. I feel like I've been taking too long to explain every little point, so I need to start speedrunning some of these too. So, next thing up is lack of clans at the beginning. This definitely felt like a weird gap where, like, I mean, I think Solemn already talked about it too. It's like, oh, here's Q4 clans, and then here's 3 more, and then here's 3 more. And like, until it got to the point that we had all 24 clans supported, it took like, what, almost a year, I want to say. And, you know, sure, they told us that at the first place, but that period where we had just Q4 was stale as hell. Like, at least once like the next 2 sets, the next 2 extra boosters released, the game felt a little bit more exciting to play. And especially by the time the AL4 booster came out, it was like, alright, we're about like halfway through now. It felt a bit better, but even then it was just like, come on, man, you know, like, I really don't want to ever go through this again. And so for Overdress, please don't do that again. Like, at least, like, if you're gonna do a hard reboot, at least like do it some way that we still have most clans playable, because the way things were just now was absolutely just appalling in my opinion. Like, the game has definitely like managed to do new mechanics better in the past. Like, I think one of the best times was when, right when we were going into Legion, I think in Japan they had a fighters collection that gave I don't know, I think that was actually only a few clans got a Legion, but there was plenty of times where like we got a Fighters Collection early and they just printed a bunch of like, you know, the new mechanic cards, like the new Stride or whatever, like for the clans, so that even if they didn't get their main form of support yet for that year, at least they had something to play with in the, you know, Fighters Collection or whatever, you know, they want to title it next. But I really hope that we don't have to go through this thing of like waiting for all the clans to get released, you know, because especially if it's a hard rotation, like we're not even going to be able to play with like the clan selection stuff for that long, so that would be quite a shame. But overall, like that period was just terrible. Now this one might be a hot take, but I don't like VRs. Why do I say this? So the reason why I say this is because a VR, and for all intents and purposes, is a card that you build around. It's like the boss unit of the clan that suddenly the deck is like centered around, and you know, like you have to dedicate your entire strategy to build around that one card. And you need 4 of them, and therefore, you know, you gotta buy a split and stuff like that. But the problem with that is that it means basically every time your favorite clan gets supported, it's gonna be probably like a new deck essentially, or in the cases like the Cross, I guess, is gonna be like support for the existing deck. But the reason why I say this is because this pattern only started in the V series. In G, sure, we had GRs, you know, GRs were like that, like bling bling rare as well, that sure, that they weren't pulled as much, but only 2 or 1 out of however many clans in that set would get them. I think it became 2 pretty quickly, but you know, only 2 clans would get them out of like 4 or 5 in the set. And essentially, you know, like not every clan would need that GR. And on top of that, there were plenty of builds that didn't use the GR either, and usually the GR was a Stride, and therefore it was like an optional card. Like every Stride was an optional card. Some of them were, of course, like, you know, the best Strides for that clan, but plenty of times throughout G, there were actually plenty of other Strides that were better than GRs, you know. There was quite a few occurrences where that was actually the case, or the GR was like a 1 of or a 2 of. They still made good sales. It's not like I had to rely on people pulling for those GR specifically, but I feel like with VRs, like having to put the boss unit at this like specific rarity that has to be like pulled 4 times of, it's not even like the most common rarity to be pulled. I don't know, I would prefer if the boss units went back to being triple rares and the supporting cards or whatever, or like whatever other mechanic they add in is the like VR, or like I guess like what's going to be overdress rare, so ODR, you know, like I'd rather have that than whatever we're going through in the V series right now, because it was just pretty annoying in my opinion. Promos, I don't think I even need to talk about this. What the hell happened with promos in the V series, especially in the last year? Like they started printing so many busted promos that should have been in the sets. Like, is this like because they printed the grade 3 searchers as triple rares? Is that why we had to get these promos, because they still had amazing effects planned, but they were like, well, we can't fit in the set anymore, promo. And you know, these were like super expensive, barely obtainable, or sometimes never obtainable in English at all. And it's like, why would you even like put us into this situation? Like clearly it's not great, clearly people don't like it, why do you keep doing it? And I really hope that stops. Like please make promos, just go back to G, go back to what it was in G, where like shop tournament promos were just like a triple rare or a double rare from the main set that had an additional little congratulations text. That's fine, that's all we need. Don't make them like exclusive cards anymore. It's so annoying, and just please, like it's getting out of hand, it's getting ridiculous. Now this I initially wanted to put into the mixed bag, but for me, honestly, this has been a negative, which is gifts as a whole. Now, hold on. Before you smash that dislike button, I liked gifts at the start. When imaginary gifts were first introduced, I was like, this is cool, this is actually a really nice thing. It adds like an extra flair to the deck that on top of like the existing 50 cards, like whether in standard or premium, it's like an additional little dimension that adds to your strategy. And I actually really liked them at the start. I thought that was a really cool thing. Adding extra circles, I was like, that's so cool. And I didn't really realize the kind of implications that splitting all the clans into 3 like specific branches would actually have. So now what we have is like every deck is like told like, you are a defensive deck, you are protect, you are an aggressive deck, you are Axel, you are mid-range, you are force, you know? And those decks now like always have to kind of belong in that camp. And I don't like that, you know. It's like throughout G it was the player's interpretation of like their deck could be built any way they want to, it can be played any way they want to, it doesn't have to follow the rules of like force or follow the rules of Axel or protect. It was just up to the player's choice, and having to like split every clan into 1 of 3 camps just sucks, honestly. And like, you know, the power discrepancies and all this stuff, it just felt so unnecessary, and I don't really get why they decided to do that overall. And I think that it's kind of strange, you know, in general. But getting back to gifts themselves, I liked gifts at first, I really did, and I thought it was a really cool concept. Then gift 2 got printed and I was kind of still like, okay, this is all right. This is still all right. Then Axel 2 became a huge problem, and suddenly nothing was all right anymore. But the thing that made me realize I don't like gifts was the fact that I didn't realize at the start how easy it is to creep a mechanic. Like, you could say that GB8s were like crept strides or whatever because they needed you to work up to that point, but that was the thing. You had to work up to that point, or like ultimate strides or whatever. You had to work towards that point. Whereas gift spam decks like Luard and things like that, or like Gurgwit until it got restricted, you don't need to do shit. You just literally have to say, like, play what the card text does, and there you go. Turn 1, you have like a bunch of gifts already, you have a bunch of forces, and it's like you don't even have to work towards this. Like, it's pretty ridiculous how easy it is to power creep this. So please, whatever new mechanic we get in Overdress, do not let it be so easily power crept. Like, this has been the most ridiculous time in the game so far, in my opinion, and it's just like inexcusable in my opinion. Like, we cannot be having this ever again. And for me, like, that power creep of gifts ruined the whole mechanic for me. Like, I really despise gifts at this point, and I really hope they are not going to be in the Overdress series whatsoever, because it's just so easy to ruin them. It's so easy to ruin them, and like now, like, how do you even like track back? Because obviously when we go into Overdress, we're probably going to get a ruling change to some things, like we got the stride rule change and stuff. Do you just tell everyone, like, you can only obtain 1 maximum gift per turn? What happens to Uranus, right? What happens to Astral Poets, right? Like, it's just so ridiculous. I don't get it. Like, at first, when only Gear Chronicle was doing it, it was kind of okay. It's like, oh yeah, they're you know, turning up time. They're turning up time. It's Gear Chronicle. That's what they do. But then suddenly a bunch of other decks started doing it. You know, when it was just Gear Chronicle doing it, it was kind of acceptable. But then suddenly we had all these like marker spam decks, and it's just like, is this really the direction you want the game to go into? Is this all the ideas you have? Clearly not, because client selection shows us you have plenty of better ideas than that. But man, oh man, like, it's gifts just left a really foul taste in my mouth, and I'm sure some of y'all love gifts, you know, but I personally think Bushrod managed them so poorly that I have nothing to remember them positively for. So yeah, I already talked about Axel 2 abusability, you know, with the extra draw and all that stuff. You know, that was the only 5k on the extra circle was supposed to be a drawback. That was funny. Trigger power, in my opinion, was a huge mistake. Increasing triggers to give plus 10k power instead of plus 5. Like, I'm super happy with the increased defensive powers, but when the trigger power went up to 10k, it's like, well, I mean, yeah, you kind of had to do that, or how do you even block against these attacks? Like, trigger power increasing to 10k, I feel like was the worst change, if anything, because that allowed for decks that could reliably just, like, you know, do a bunch of drive checks or like check a bunch of triggers, just win through that alone. It took away the skill-based part of the game where like calculating things was way more rewarded, and like suddenly, you know, an addition of 10k to a single unit or 20k to a single unit was just so much more overpowering than it just like 5k or 10k was in the past. Like, it's ridiculous. It's actually crazy. Like, before, like, checking double triggers, which equaled 10k power, was a huge deal, but now it's just like everything goes up in increments of 10. It's ridiculous, and I kind of want it to be inverted back to 5k, honestly, because I don't know, it probably won't be. It probably is going to stay with 10k, but if you do keep it with 10k, at least make the shield powers go up even higher so we can actually deal with this. Alright, I already talked about Mordred clones, unoriginality with effects, plus 10k to front row and gift spam. That became kind of the flavor of V-Series decks, like, oh, plus 10k to front row, plus X to front row, plus something to front row, restand front row, you know, like, it's just, every deck, every protect deck, you know, it became a meme, like, every protect deck can just, like, attack 5 times, you know, and stuff like that. It's just like, this was probably not intended, but here we are. R&D, that's of course the big highlight, you know, that of last year. The research and development sector definitely was not doing too hot last year, and definitely made some interesting mistakes, and that's one of my big complaints here too. Restrictions were pretty haphazard as well. Unintended effects, you know, Luard, Nemain, unintended. Like, Gurgwit and Percival, unintended. Like, come on, man. Like, you can see this, anyone can see this from a mile coming by just putting new cards together into one deck. Like, it feels like, I'm so glad they made a new development team, it feels like, or like at least refined it so that we have like the level of quality that client selection has in terms of like how cool the effects are. It's a shame that everything before them power creeps them, but it's like, I wish that was a level of power we were on for all of V-Series rather than whatever we're having to deal with right now, you know, in the current meta, because it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Orders were not really explored. You know, this is something that I think we're all aware of. Orders weren't really explored, and I don't know why they went through all the effort to explain, like, here is what a normal order does. You play it in your main phase. You can only use it once per turn. Here's a blitz order. You can play it during your opponent's turn. Wow. And then the only blitz order they released was Quick Shield. For real? That's it? That's all? That's what we're stopping at? Just quick shield? Literally the coin from Hearthstone? Okay, bro, whatever you say. Like, it just felt like a shame. You introduced this new mechanic that was supposed to be like a big deal. Like, everybody thought like, oh my god, it's gonna be such a huge deal. They're gonna make orders super strong. I heard this rumor that the orders are gonna be super power crept and gonna be game changing and blah 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 blah. And, you know, the best order in the game is the MLB one, which is just for Royal Paladin and for MLB specifically. So, you know, they didn't really do much with that, and I really hope that they do in the future, because there's like limitless potential in adding spell cards to Vanguard. You know, there's so much you can do with it, but they chose to not really do much with it instead. Lack of defensive options is immediately connected to that. You know, when they introduced quick shield, everyone was like, oh, new defensive options, oh my god, like we're gonna get more defensive options. There's gonna be so many different types of blitz orders and stuff like that, and then no. You know, like at least in G, one of the highlights of G was when they created G guards, which is like literally probably one of the peaks of the game in general, because we finally got defensive creep. But here it's like, no, more power, more power, more power, that's it. A little bit on premium. Premium collection was very hype, but definitely had some problem children within them too. And especially I think the problem children, you know, first premium collection was like, it was already hype set, but then it felt mismanaged. Like Katrina came out and that was a thing, Gastil was a thing, like Ichikishima got banned within like 2 months of release, which was really yikes. And then aside from that, then the 2020 one comes through and here's all these Cray Elementals that suddenly break the game. Zazan literally broke the game and got restricted literally as soon as it could, and on top of that, like we have like Huam and stuff like that that kind of makes the game not as fun to play in that format too. And so overall, I don't know, it felt like the premium collections were very hype, but not as well researched. You know, we're kind of coming back to that as people would have hoped for. No new G guards in premium collection also felt really weird. Like, you know, this is such an integral part of premium. Why would you not print at least one new G guard for all the clans? That would also make it so that the older decks can deal with the offensive power creep of the V-Series, because, you know, you guessed it, V-Series cards don't just affect standard, they affect premium too. And I feel like maybe with new G-Guards, some of the older G-era decks could have survived better if they didn't have to, you know, convert into playing V-Series cards all the time and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So it definitely felt like a shame to not get new G-Guards. Like, sure, strides are exciting, but defensive options are just as important in this format. No downside to going first. You know, when Quick Shield was introduced, they were like, finally, it's good to go second again. Not at all. Going first just became even better over time. Quick Shield is like literally the coin from Hearthstone. You discard it for a random cost somewhere along the line, or maybe guard with it if you want to, and it just didn't feel good to go second ever. Like, I feel like it was only at the very start of the game did it ever feel good to go second, and I really hope that just please, whatever you do in the future of the game, make sure the new mechanic requires both players to be on grade 3, otherwise it's always going to be better to go first, and I think all of us are sick of the dice roll game. And now this one is going to be a bit more company related, and for me this is the sort of fear of reboot cycles. So whether Overdress will be a reboot or not, at this stage I don't know. We're going to find out in a few days. And we don't know if it's going to be reboot, we don't even know what kind of rotation it's going to be or anything like that. But that one reboot happening has instilled fear in people's minds that it's like, sure, I'm having fun with Vanguard now, but what if it rotates? What if next year all my cards are gone? What if I have to sell everything and build new decks again? What if I don't want to play premium? What if I don't want to like, you know, part ways with these cards? What do I do then? Do I quit? You know, like that kind of fear that it has like injected in people's minds isn't good. This was not a great move in my opinion, and now it's like, Overdress is coming. We don't really know much until the announcement stream happens, and we haven't for months, ever since like half a year ago they announced the whole thing is actually happening, and so we're just kind of sitting here like, so what's gonna happen? And that kind of connects me to my next point. In some ways they've been doing good, in some ways not so good, but there's been a lack of transparency from the Japanese side of the company sometimes. You know, like the fact that we've known nothing about Overdress for 6 months is a little bit troubling in my opinion. I feel like we should have been told a little bit more than what we know right now, because this feels a little bit problematic. And so I hope that in the future they're a little bit more transparent and, you know, kind of update us on things a bit quicker and not as sort of kind of like hiding stuff as if maybe it's an unfinished product or something, you know? We'd like to know more. We'd like to be teased, you know? Give us some sort of teasers, like give us something, at least something. It feels like complete lack of transparency this year, and, you know, it didn't feel that bad in the past either, which is kind of weird because, you know, normally these things get better over time, not worse. Removal of flex, or if you will, in today's 2021 terms, removal of drip. So SVRs got kind of just disappeared after like the next stage booster for whatever reason. That was kind of weird. IMRs as well, like, you know, having the marker with the actual character on them. I like the secret ones too with the color patterns, but all of those just kind of disappeared without them saying anything. Like, again, that comes back to transparency. Like, why don't you say something about those types of rarities going away? There's people that collect SVRs, you know? There's like literally a dude on Twitter that posted like his collection of every single SVR, and you just like casually discontinued that without him getting a chance to actually get SVRs of the G era boss units. That doesn't feel too nice, does it? So I don't know, feels weird. I like SPs as much as the other guy, but SVRs were a nice little alternative for people that like the different background and different foiling and all that kind of stuff, and I don't know, feels weird that they removed that all of a sudden. Alright, last 3 points. So first things first is game length. Games became very fast, and to some people that's going to be a great thing. I personally feel like it's a little bit too quick. Games ending on turn 3, again, some decks does not feel good for me at the very least, and I think, you know, turn 4 as well is a little bit early. Like, both formats basically end on turn 4 as well, which is like, I get that, you know, it's, I don't know, I feel like turn 5, 6 formats always felt more fun to play because it's a bit more grindy, a bit more drawn out, but at the very least you have like more room for mistakes as in a certain way as well. But at the same time, the V-Series felt like it wasn't so much that you got punished for your mistakes, but your opponent's deck was just so explosive that they just kind of did their thing and you died on turn 3 or 4 anyway. So I kind of want to go back to that, where like your mistake in guarding or your mistake in how you play certain cards cost you the game, rather than like, oh, I went second and I gave my opponent 2 damage, guess I'm dead, you know, that kind of thing. Like, it's just like, I don't know, feels like we could be, you know, things could be better, especially for standard. Premium I feel like is still fine, but, you know, outside of the not so well supported, you know, restriction lists and stuff like that. And now this one is going to be kind of a general argument, I guess, for all of Vanguard in general, but it still relies on the anime quite a lot, and a lot of clans are over supported even to this day. You know, in the last year it was more equally distributed. You know, most clans got only one wave of support, with like the only exceptions being like Angels and Narukami and Shadows, I guess. But overall, on Aquaforce 2, I guess, anything that was like Shinamon era and then became G era stuff, I guess those things, like, you know, there was still a reliance on anime, which is great for the most part, because you see stuff in the anime, you get hyped, then you want to build it, right? But at the same time, try to keep equality between clans. Like, Royals got so much support, and then they were a pretty mediocre deck for most of it, you know? Instead of making so many waves of support for Royals, you could have just, like, made less waves, put more of those cards into one booster. Like, it's fine for cards in the, like, for the anime to leak cards that won't come out for, like, 4 months, you know? Remember when Dimensional Robos were, like, were shown in the anime for the first time, like, with Gradation stuff? Those cards didn't come out in the TCG for ages, like, for quite a while later. So it's like, I don't know why you don't need to really, like, I don't know, over support clans in the future, even though I know it's gonna happen. But, you know, that's just like another complaint that comes up all the time. And finally, lack of premium push in Japan. You know, this wasn't always the case. GP Akiba was amazing because that's when, like, everyone collectively just played premium. Like 2019 summer, everyone was playing premium because premium collection was super hype and GP Akiba was like super hype. I would imagine it would have happened in 2020 as well when the premium collection came out too, but, you know, COVID happened, so of course that's not going to be really the case. But anyway, you know, I feel like the premium community has been growing now as of late because a lot of people are afraid of standard rotating, so they're like getting G zones for their standard decks so they can still, you know, play with those decks in premium at least. So it's like, it's cool that that's happening, but it took 3 years and rumors of a reboot, so it's like, or standard rotating, like Stan Ochi is what they call it. So, you know, that's not the best way to do it. It would have been nicer if the company actually supported premium more and actually made premium events in all of 2020 instead of just saying VMC standard, WGP standard. Like, come on, y'all, you can do better than this. Alright, I surprisingly didn't get too heated, which is a good thing. So those are all that's basically my review of the V-Series. All the good things, all the bad things, all the mixed things. You know, it's a mixed bag overall, but, you know, I have my good memories with it, I have some bad memories with it, I have some great things to say about it, some bad things to say about it. What about you guys? Let me know what you guys think of V-Series now that it's coming to an end. Of course, we still have clan selection coming up, but we basically know most of the cards from it already, and we kind of have the general kind of grasp of what the set is going to be looking like, and I think most people are pretty excited. But at the same time, you know, let me know your thoughts of what you thought of V-Series these last 3 years. Were you like me and tried to revive your locals because the game got rebooted, or did you have a different experience? Did you mostly focus on premium and stuff like that? You know, I want to hear your guys' thoughts too. Sadly, you know, this isn't as sentimental as my thank you G video, but hopefully, you know, when Overdress comes to an end after like 4 more years or whatever, 3 or 4 years away from now, you know, I'll be able to look back on that on a much more positive and much more sad and much more kind of like lonely note, rather than the way with V-Series now where it's like, yeah, this happened. Can we have Overdress already? Thanks. Anyway, on that note, that's gonna be it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.